I never thought I'd be the one to pull the financial rug out from under my own family. But when you've been the dependable one for too long, sometimes the only way to be heard is through silence. My name is Nellie Wilson, and at 42, I'm still learning how to put myself first. The morning started like any other Tuesday, a flurry of emails flooding my inbox before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. As department head at Wilson & Clark Trading, I'd grown accustomed to the constant demands on my attention. The office was already humming with activity when I arrived, the familiar scent of printer toner and stale coffee grounding me in reality, as my mind threatened to drift back to Sunday's disaster. "Morning, Nellie," said Diane, my assistant, handing me a stack of reports that needed my signature. "You look like you could use another cup." I forced a smile. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's worked with you for 7 years," she replied, her eyes softening with concern. "Everything okay?" No, everything was not okay. 3 days ago, my parents had kicked me and my 12-year-old son, Jake, out of their house during Thanksgiving dinner because my younger sister, Vanessa, didn't want to see me. The memory of Jake's confused face as we drove home in silence still made my chest tighten. "Just family stuff," I said, taking the reports. "Nothing I can't handle." Diane nodded, knowing better than to push. She'd been there through my divorce 3 years ago, had seen me piece myself back together one grueling day at a time. This was just another bump in the road. My office felt like a sanctuary as I closed the door behind me. I sank into my chair and allowed myself 30 seconds to close my eyes and breathe. 30 seconds was all I could spare. The quarterly projections were due by end of day, and I had a video conference with our European partners at noon. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark, my ex-husband. Despite our divorce, we'd managed to maintain a functional co-parenting relationship. For Jake's sake, Jake forgot his science project at my place, dropping it at school now. He seemed quiet this morning. "Everything okay?" I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the screen. What was I supposed to say? That his son had witnessed his maternal grandparents choosing his aunt's feelings over his presence at a family gathering? That Jake had asked me on the drive home why Grandma and Grandpa didn't want us there? "Thanks for taking care of the project," I typed instead. "Jake's fine, just tired from the weekend." The lie came easily, a small protection for both Mark and Jake. Mark didn't need to be dragged into my family drama, and Jake didn't need his father questioning him about things he was still processing himself. I set my phone aside and turned to my computer. Work had always been my refuge, the one place where competence and effort were rewarded with tangible results. Family was messier, more complex, with decades of patterns so ingrained they seemed impossible to change. As I worked through the morning, my mind kept returning to Vanessa. My sister, 3 years younger and infinitely more magnetic, had always been the family favorite. Where I was practical and reserved, Vanessa was vibrant and expressive. I'd made peace with this dynamic long ago, or so I'd thought. The trouble had started months earlier, when Vanessa had approached me about investing in her latest business venture, a food truck specializing in gourmet grilled cheese sandwiches. It wasn't the first time she'd come to me for money. Over the years, I'd funded her pottery studio, her online jewelry shop, her brief stint as a life coach. None of these endeavors had lasted more than 6 months. "It's different this time, Nellie," she'd insisted over coffee. "I've done the research. Food trucks are practically recession-proof." "Vanessa, I don't have $15,000 to give you right now," I'd said, trying to be gentle. "I'm still paying for Jake's braces, and the house needs a new roof before winter." Her face had hardened. "You mean you don't want to give me $15,000? Your job pays well, and you got the house in the divorce. You can afford it." "It's not about affording it," I'd explained, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest that conversations with Vanessa often triggered. "It's about making responsible financial choices." "Right," she'd scoffed. "Because you're so responsible, and I'm just the flighty little sister who can't be trusted. Thanks for the vote of confidence." She'd left the coffee shop in a huff, and, Our interaction since had been strained at best. I hadn't thought she'd escalate things to the level of ruining Thanksgiving, though. That had taken me by surprise. The memory of Sunday replayed in my mind as I half-heartedly reviewed budget allocations. We'd arrived at my parents' house at 2 o'clock, Jake carrying the homemade apple pie we'd baked together the night before. My father had opened the door, his expression already apologetic. "Nellie, we need to talk," he'd said quietly, ushering us into the foyer while the sounds of cheerful conversation drifted from the dining room. "Vanessa is here with Phil and the kids. She's still upset about, well, you know." "Dad, that was months ago," I'd replied, keeping my voice low so Jake wouldn't hear as he wandered toward the kitchen with the pie. "And it was just a business discussion. She asked for money, I said no. It happens all the time in normal families." My father had sighed, running a hand through his thinning gray hair. "Your sister says she can't enjoy the holiday with this tension. Between you two? Your mother and I think it might be best if you and Jake skip this year, just until things calm down." I'd stared at him, disbelief washing over me. "You want us to leave? Now? Jake's been looking forward to seeing his cousins for weeks. The pie's already here." "I'm sorry, sweetheart." His eyes had darted toward the dining room. "Vanessa got here first, and you know how she gets. She's threatening to leave, and she has all 3 kids with her. It would break your mother's heart not to have the little ones here." The implication was clear. Vanessa's children were more valuable guests than my son. The unfairness of it had stolen my breath. "Dad," I'd said, my voice shaking with the effort to stay calm, "do you realize what you're doing? You're teaching Jake that it's okay to exclude family members because someone is having a tantrum." "It's not like that," he'd protested weakly. "It's just one holiday. You're the stronger one, Nellie. You've always been able to handle these things better than your sister." That was when Jake had returned, his expression confused. "Grandpa, Aunt Vanessa just asked why we're still here." The shame on my father's face hadn't been enough to make him stand up to Vanessa. He'd mumbled another apology as I'd taken Jake's hand and led him back to the car, leaving the pie behind. My office phone rang, jolting me back to the present. "Nellie Wilson," I answered automatically. "Ms. Wilson, this is Greenfield Bank calling about your automatic payment to Raymond and Louise Wilson." The professional voice on the other end belonged to someone who had no idea they were stepping into a family minefield. The payment was declined due to insufficient funds in the designated account. I'd forgotten about the monthly transfer. To my parents' account, $2,000 that I'd been sending since my father's retirement 3 years ago. The same amount of time since my divorce, when I'd promised myself I'd be more assertive about my own needs. "There's no mistake," I said, after a pause. "I've closed that particular account. The automatic payments should have been canceled." "I see," said the banker, sounding mildly surprised. "Well, if you'd like to set up a new payment method—" "That won't be necessary," I interrupted, "but thank you for calling." As I hung up, a strange lightness spread through my chest. I hadn't planned to cut off my parents financially. It had happened automatically when I'd closed the old joint account I'd shared with Mark and finally gotten around to moving everything to my own name. But now that it had happened, I found I didn't want to fix it. For 3 years, I'd been paying my parents' property taxes and supplementing their retirement income without complaint. I'd also loaned Vanessa money on 6 separate occasions, only one of which had been paid back, all while carefully budgeting for Jake's needs and our modest but comfortable lifestyle. I pulled up my banking app and scrolled through the past year of transactions. The total amount I'd given my family neared $30,000, money that could have gone toward Jake's college fund or the house repairs I'd been postponing. A gentle knock on my door preceded Diane's head poking in. "Your conference call starts in 5 minutes. Do you want me to bring you lunch afterward? A bunch of us are ordering from that new Thai place." "That sounds great," I said, shutting down the banking app. "Get me the green curry, extra spicy." The rest of the workday passed in a blur of meetings and email exchanges. By the time I pulled into my driveway at 6:30, the sky was already dark with the late November evening. The porch light was on. Jake knew how to let himself in after school and had become increasingly independent since the divorce. I found him at the kitchen table, textbooks spread out around him as he frowned at his math homework. "Hey, buddy," I said, setting down my bag and keys. "How was school?" "Fine," he mumbled, not looking up. "Dad dropped off my science project." "I know," he texted me. I opened the refrigerator, surveying our options for dinner. "Pasta okay tonight?" Jake nodded, still focused on his math problem. I filled a pot with water and set it on the stove, then leaned against the counter, watching my son. His dark hair fell across his forehead in a way that reminded me of Mark. But his serious expression and the careful way he wrote out each step of his calculations were all me. "Jake," I said softly, "about Sunday." He tensed visibly. "It's fine, Mom. I didn't want to go anyway." "It's not fine," I insisted, moving to sit across from him at the table. "What happened wasn't okay, and it wasn't about you. I want you to know that." Jake finally looked up, his eyes, so much like mine, studying my face. "Is Aunt Vanessa mad at me too?" My heart broke a little at the question. "No, sweetheart. Aunt Vanessa is upset with me because I wouldn't give her money for a new business. It has nothing to do with you." "Then why couldn't I stay and hang out with Brian and Emma and Zoe?" he asked, referring to his cousins. "Dad lets me stay at his place when he has friends over that he's fighting with." I suppressed a twinge of irritation at the comparison. Mark and I had worked hard to create healthy boundaries after our divorce, but sometimes Jake still tried to play us against each other. "That's different," I explained. "Your dad and I are both your parents, and we both want you around all the time. This situation with Grandma and Grandpa, it's complicated. Family relationships sometimes are." Jake considered this for a moment. "Are we still going to Grandma and Grandpa's for Christmas?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought that far ahead, but the bank call earlier had set something in motion that I wasn't ready to walk back. "I'm not sure," I said honestly. "We might do something different this year, just you and me. Maybe we could go skiing or visit Aunt Rachel in Colorado." "Aunt Rachel isn't even really my aunt," Jake pointed out. "She's just your friend from college. Sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into." I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "Rachel has been there for us through a lot." The water on the stove began to boil, giving me an excuse to turn away from Jake's thoughtful gaze. As I poured pasta into the pot, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. Perfect timing. "Hi, Mom," I answered, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Nellie, there seems to be some mistake with the bank," she said without preamble. "Dad went to pay the electric bill, and the money you usually send wasn't there." I stirred the pasta slowly, gathering my thoughts. "That's not a mistake, Mom. I've decided to stop the monthly transfers." A stunned silence filled the line. "What do you mean, stop? We're counting on that money, Nellie. Your father's pension barely covers our medication." The guilt trip was so familiar that I almost laughed. My parents weren't destitute. They owned their home outright and had 2 retirement accounts. The money I sent allowed them to maintain the lifestyle they'd grown accustomed to, nothing more. "I think it's time we reassess our arrangement," I said carefully, aware that Jake was probably listening. "After what happened on Sunday, I need to reevaluate my priorities." "This is about Thanksgiving?" My mother's voice rose in pitch. "For heaven's sake, Nellie, it was one dinner. You've always been so sensitive." "It wasn't just a dinner, Mom. You and Dad chose to kick out your grandson because Vanessa was throwing a tantrum about a personal financial decision I made. That's not normal or acceptable behavior." I could hear my father in the background, asking what was wrong. My mother covered the phone, her muffled voice explaining the situation to him. "Your father wants to speak to you," she said after a moment. "Put him on speakerphone," I replied, my resolve strengthening. I want both of you to hear this. There was a shuffling sound, and then my father's gruff voice came through. Nellie, what's all this about cutting us off? Is this some kind of revenge for Sunday? It's not revenge, Dad. It's a boundary. For 3 years, I've been supporting you financially without question. At the same time, I've been the family scapegoat whenever Vanessa's feelings get hurt. I'm done playing both roles. We never asked you to send us money, my mother interjected, though we all knew that wasn't exactly true. The loans had started small and gradually transformed into expected monthly contributions. You're right, Mom. You never explicitly asked. But you made it clear that as the successful daughter, it was my responsibility to help out. And I was happy to do it when I felt respected and valued as part of this family. Sunday showed me that I'm not. Jake had abandoned any pretense of doing homework and was watching me with wide eyes. I gave him a small smile, hoping to reassure him that everything was under control. So that's it? My father demanded. We have one disagreement and you punish us financially? I'm not punishing you, I said firmly. I'm prioritizing my son and myself. The money I've been sending you will now go toward Jake's college fund and home repairs. If you're struggling financially, I suggest you ask Vanessa to contribute. According to her, that food truck business is going to be incredibly profitable. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know about whether my parents had held Vanessa to the same standards they'd always expected of me. I have to go now, I said. Dinner's ready, and Jake needs help with his math homework. I'll call you next week and we can discuss this more calmly. I hung up before they could respond, my hands trembling slightly as I drained the pasta in the sink. Steam rose around my face, creating a momentary shield from Jake's curious gaze. Are Grandma and Grandpa mad at you now too? He asked when I turned back to the table. I considered sugarcoating my answer but decided against it. Jake was old enough to understand some adult concepts, and I'd always tried to be honest with him when appropriate. They're upset, I admitted. I've been helping them with money for a long time, and I just told them I'm going to stop. Jake's brow furrowed. Because they were mean to us on Thanksgiving? Partly, I said, serving him a plate of pasta and taking a seat. But also because I need to make sure I'm taking care of us first. Sometimes adults have to make tough decisions about how to use their resources. He nodded slowly, processing. This. Like when Dad said we couldn't go to Disney World this summer because he's saving for a house? Exactly like that. I twirled pasta around my fork, surprised by my son's insight. Money is just one kind of resource, though. Time and emotional energy are important, too. And lately, I've been giving too much of all three to people who don't appreciate it. Jake took a bite of his dinner, chewing thoughtfully. Does that include me? Because I appreciate you, Mom, even when I don't act like it. My throat tightened unexpectedly. No, buddy, you're the best investment I've ever made. His smile was worth every penny I'd ever earned and every difficult conversation I'd ever faced. For the first time since Sunday, I felt genuinely certain about my decision. After dinner, I helped Jake with his math problems, then sent him upstairs to shower while I cleaned up the kitchen. As I loaded the dishwasher, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Mom and Dad just called me crying. How could you do this to them? I stared at the message, a familiar mixture of anger and guilt swirling in my stomach. Typical Vanessa framing my decision as an attack rather than a consequence. I started typing several responses before deleting them all. Instead, I set my phone aside and focused on wiping down the counters. Vanessa could wait. For once in my life, I didn't feel compelled to justify myself to my family immediately. It was a strange sensation, liberating and terrifying at once. By the time Jake was in bed and I'd settled on the couch with a glass of wine and my laptop to finish reviewing some work documents, my phone had accumulated 3 missed calls from Vanessa and another text from my mother. Please call us back. We need to figure this out. I silenced my phone and opened my email instead. Among the work messages was one from Rachel, my college roommate who'd remained my closest friend through marriage, motherhood, and divorce. "Hey, stranger," she'd written. "Haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay? Still on for our annual New Year's call? The guest room is always ready if you and Jake want to visit Colorado instead. Miss you." I smiled at her message. Rachel had never married or had children, choosing instead to pursue a career as an environmental lawyer that took her around the country. Despite our different life paths, she'd always been there when I needed her, flying in to help when Jake was born, and again when Mark and I separated. "Things are complicated right now," I wrote back. "Family drama reaching new heights. Might take you up on that guest room offer sooner than New Year's. We'll call this weekend to catch up properly." After sending the email, I closed my laptop and leaned back against the couch cushions, allowing myself to really feel the events of the past few days. The hurt of being asked to leave Thanksgiving dinner. The shame of having Jake witness that rejection. The strange power of saying no to my parents after years of automatic yeses. I was still processing these feelings when my doorbell rang, startling me. It was nearly 10 o'clock, too late for casual visitors. A spike of anxiety shot through me. As I approached the door cautiously and peeked through the peephole, Vanessa stood on my porch, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, and even through the distorted peephole view, I could see she'd been crying. I hesitated, seriously considering pretending I wasn't home. But Jake was asleep upstairs, and if Vanessa made enough noise, she might wake him. Besides, this confrontation was inevitable. Better to have it on my territory than hers. I opened the door but remained firmly in the doorway, blocking entrance. "It's late, Vanessa. What do you want?" "What do I want?" she repeated incredulously. "I want you to explain why you're suddenly cutting off Mom and Dad after everything they've done for you." Her voice carried in the quiet neighborhood, and I winced, glancing toward my neighbors' houses. "If we're going to have this conversation, we're having it inside, quietly." I stepped aside reluctantly, allowing her to enter. Vanessa had always had a flair for the dramatic, and I wasn't about to give the neighborhood a show. "Jake is asleep," I warned as I led her to the kitchen, the furthest room from the bedrooms upstairs. "If you wake him up with your yelling, this conversation is over." Vanessa sat at the kitchen table, the same spot Jake had occupied hours earlier, and fixed me with a glare. "I'm not the one who started this, Nellie. You dropped a financial bomb on Mom and Dad without any warning." "Without warning?" I echoed, keeping my voice low but intense. "Vanessa, they kicked me and Jake out of Thanksgiving dinner because you were upset that I wouldn't fund your food truck idea. How was that not a warning that our relationship was changing?" She had the grace to look slightly abashed, but quickly rallied. "That was different. It was one holiday. This is their livelihood." "It's not their livelihood," I corrected her. "It's supplemental income that I've been providing because I could afford to and because I wanted to help. But family support goes both ways, and I didn't feel very supported on Sunday." Vanessa ran a hand through her hair, dislodging strands from her ponytail. "So you're punishing them for something I did. That's mature." "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm establishing boundaries and priorities." I sat across from her, mirroring our positions from our last coffee shop confrontation. "And let's be honest, Vanessa, Mom and Dad had a choice on Sunday. They chose to prioritize your feelings over Jake's. They're adults who made a decision, and now they're experiencing the consequence. They can't make their property tax payment." "This month," Vanessa said, a note of genuine worry creeping into her voice. "Dad's medical bills have been piling up, and they were counting on your money." A twinge of concern flickered through me, but I pushed it aside. "Dad has Medicare and a supplemental insurance policy, and they can work out a payment plan for the property taxes. They're not destitute, Vanessa. They're just uncomfortable." "Easy for you to say with your big corporate job," she muttered. "Some of us don't have that kind of security." "And whose fault is that?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "You've started and abandoned 6 different business ventures in the past 5 years. Maybe if you'd stuck with one of them, you'd have built something sustainable by now." Vanessa's face flushed with anger. Not everyone can be perfect like you, Nellie. Some of us take risks and try new things instead of playing it safe our whole lives. The characterization stung because it held a grain of truth. I had always been the cautious sister, the planner. But my safe choices had also created stability for Jake and allowed me the financial freedom to help my family, a freedom Vanessa seemed to take for granted. I'm not perfect, I said quietly. But I am responsible, and part of being responsible is recognizing when a relationship has become unhealthy. Vanessa scoffed. So now your relationship with Mom and Dad is unhealthy because of one bad holiday? It's been unhealthy for a long time, I admitted, the realization crystallizing as I spoke. I've been the family ATM and emotional support system while simultaneously being the one who's expected to absorb all the criticism and accommodate everyone else's needs. That's not balance, Vanessa. It's not fair to me, and it's not fair to Jake. At the mention of Jake, Vanessa's expression softened slightly. Despite our differences, she did care about her nephew. Jake knows this isn't about him, right? I didn't want him to leave on Sunday. I couldn't face you after how dismissive you were about my business idea. I bit back a sharp retort about the difference between dismissiveness and financial responsibility. Jake is confused and hurt. He doesn't understand why his family would ask him to leave a holiday gathering. And honestly, neither do I. Vanessa looked down at her hands, picking at a chipped nail polish. I didn't think Mom and Dad would actually make you leave. I just told them I was uncomfortable. And yet they did make us leave, I said, because they've always catered to your comfort over everyone else's, including mine, including Jake's. A heavy silence fell between us. Through the window above the sink, I could see the half moon hanging in the clear November sky. Once, when we were children, Vanessa and I had pretended the moon was following our car during a long night drive home from our grandparents' house. We'd made up stories about why it was chasing us, giggling in the back seat while our parents smiled at our imagination. That memory felt like it belonged to different people now. I can't fix this for you, I said finally. I know Mom and Dad are hoping you'll convince me to change my mind, but it's not going to happen. At least not right away. I need time and space to figure out what kind of relationship I want with them going forward. Vanessa looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. What about me? What kind of relationship do you want with me? The vulnerability in her question caught me off guard. Beneath her defensive posturing, Vanessa was afraid of losing me, her stable, dependable older sister who'd always been there no matter what. I don't know, I answered honestly. I love you, Vanessa. You're my sister. But I don't like how you treat me sometimes. And I definitely don't like how you manipulate Mom and Dad against me when you don't get your way. She flinched at my directness. That's not what I was doing, isn't it? You knew exactly what would happen when you told them you were uncomfortable around me. You knew they'd choose your comfort over mine, just like they always have. Vanessa didn't deny it, which was as close to an admission as I was likely to get. She fidgeted with her car keys, the silence stretching between us again. What am I supposed to tell them? She asked finally. Tell them the truth, I suggested. That I'm taking a step back from financial support to reevaluate our family dynamic. That I'm not cutting them off emotionally, but I am setting new boundaries. And that those boundaries include not being excluded from family gatherings because you're upset with me. Vanessa nodded slowly. And the food truck? Is that completely off the table too? I almost laughed at her persistence. Yes, Vanessa, the food truck is off the table. I'm focusing my financial resources on Jake's future and our household needs. She looked disappointed but not surprised. Fine, I'll figure it out myself. Phil's brother knows someone in the restaurant business who might be interested in investing. I hope it works out, I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want Vanessa to fail. I just didn't want to be her safety net anymore. She stood up, gathering her purse and keys. I should go. Phil is home with the kids, and I left in a hurry. I walked her to the door, feeling strangely lighter than I had at the beginning of our conversation. We hadn't resolved everything, far from it, but at least the issues were out in the open now. "Nellie," Vanessa said as she stepped onto the porch. "For what it's worth, I am sorry about Thanksgiving. I didn't think it through." It wasn't a full apology, but from Vanessa, it was significant. "Thank you for saying that." She hesitated, then gave me a quick, awkward hug before hurrying to her car. I watched her drive away, the red taillights disappearing around the corner of my quiet street. Back inside, I checked on Jake, who was sleeping peacefully, his math textbook still open on his bedside table. I gently closed it and pulled his comforter up to his shoulders. Tomorrow we talk more about family and boundaries and how sometimes loving someone means saying no. But for tonight, I was content to let him rest in the innocent belief that adults would eventually work out their problems. As I prepared for bed myself, I noticed a new text message on my phone. It was from Mark. "Jake mentioned something about Thanksgiving being weird. Everything all right with your family?" I considered how to respond. Mark and I had been divorced long enough that he wasn't technically obligated to care about my family drama anymore. But he was Jake's father, and anything that affected Jake was his business. "Long story," I texted back. "Family disagreement that got out of hand. Jake and I were asked to leave Thanksgiving dinner. He's processing, but he's okay. I'll fill you in more when I drop him off on Friday." Mark's response came quickly. "That's messed up." Jake seemed confused about it. "Let me know if you need anything." His support, simple as it was, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Our marriage had ended because we'd grown apart, not because we didn't care about each other. In some ways, we were better at supporting each other as co-parents than we had been as spouses. "Thanks," I replied. "We're okay, just navigating some new boundaries with my parents and Vanessa." "About time," came his response, followed by a thumbs-up emoji. I smiled, remembering how Mark had often encouraged me to stand up to my family more during our marriage. He'd seen the imbalance in our dynamic long before I'd been willing to acknowledge it. Sleep came easier than I'd expected that night. The confrontation with Vanessa had drained me, but it had also clarified something important. I wasn't wrong to protect myself and Jake from the dysfunctional patterns in my family. The guilt I'd been carrying since Sunday began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet determination to reshape these relationships on healthier terms. Morning arrived with a flurry of texts from my mother, alternating between guilt trips, Dad couldn't sleep all night worrying about the bills, and olive branches. Come for dinner this weekend and we can talk this through like adults. I read them all, but decided not to respond immediately. Taking a step back didn't mean cutting off communication entirely, but it did mean being more intentional about when and how I engaged. Jake was subdued as I drove him to school, staring out the window at the bare trees lining our route. "Aunt Vanessa came over last night," I said, breaking the silence. "After you were asleep." His head swiveled toward me. "What did she want?" "To talk about the situation with Grandma and Grandpa," I explained. "She's upset that I'm not sending them money anymore." Jake frowned. "You give Grandma and Grandpa money? Like an allowance?" I smiled at his characterization. "Sort of. I've been helping them with their bills for a few years now. But after what happened on Sunday, I decided that needed to change." "Because they were mean to us?" "Because they made choices that hurt us," I clarified. "And because I need to make sure I'm taking care of our needs first." Jake was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Dad says you always try to fix everyone's problems. He says that's why you get stressed a lot." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by this insight into my ex-husband's observations. "Your dad said that, huh?" "Well, he's not entirely wrong. I do try to help people I care about, sometimes more than is good for me." "Is that why you and Dad got divorced? Because you were fixing other people's problems instead of yours?" The question was so perceptive that it momentarily took my breath away. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. That was part of it, I admitted. as we pulled up to the school drop-off lane. Your dad and I had different priorities, and we weren't very good at talking about them. But our divorce wasn't anyone's fault, Jake, and we both love you very much. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. Mom, I'm glad you're not giving Grandma and Grandpa money if they're going to be mean to us, and I don't care if we don't go to their house for Christmas. His support warmed my heart. Thanks, buddy. We'll figure out something special to do, just the two of us. Maybe with Aunt Rachel if she's free. Jake grinned and grabbed his backpack. Can we go skiing? Dad never wants to go because he says it's too cold. I laughed, remembering Mark's famous aversion to winter sports. We'll see. Have a good day at school, okay? As I watched him jog toward the building, I marveled at his resilience. Children adapted to change more readily than adults sometimes, especially when they felt secure in the love of their parents. Jake knew I had his back, and that knowledge gave him confidence to face whatever came next. The workday passed in a blur of meetings and year-end projections. I'd just finished a conference call when Diane knocked on my open door. Your sister's online too, she said, her expression curious. Vanessa rarely called me at work. I sighed and picked up the phone. This is Nellie. Mom's in the hospital, Vanessa said without preamble. Dad found her unconscious this morning. They think it might be her heart. The world seemed to tilt sideways for a moment. Despite our recent conflict, the thought of my mother in danger sent a cold spike of fear through me. Which hospital? I asked, already grabbing my purse. Memorial. Dad's with her now. I'm on my way. Vanessa's voice caught. Nellie, she wasn't. Looking good when the ambulance took her. Dad said she was clutching her chest before she collapsed. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I promised, a knot forming in my stomach. Had the stress of our financial dispute triggered this? Was this somehow my fault? I pushed the thought aside as I explained the emergency to Diane and headed for my car. Family drama aside, my mother needed me now, and I wouldn't withhold emotional support the way I'd decided to withhold financial support. The hospital parking lot was crowded, forcing me to park in the farthest row and jog to the entrance. At the information desk, I learned my mother had been taken to the cardiac care unit on the 4th floor. The elevator ride seemed interminable, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. I found my father in the waiting room, his face ashen as he stared blankly at a muted television mounted on the wall. He looked older than he had just days ago, the lines around his mouth deeper, his shoulders more stooped. Dad, I said softly, touching his arm. How is she? He looked up, relief washing over his features. Nellie, you came. Of course I came, I replied, sitting beside him. What happened? She was making breakfast, he explained, his voice rough with emotion. 1 minute she was scrambling eggs, the next she was on the floor. I called 911 right away, but she wasn't responding. Did the doctors say anything yet? I asked, taking his hand. It felt papery and cold in mine. They're running tests. Something. About elevated enzymes that might indicate a heart attack. He squeezed my hand weakly. I should have noticed something was wrong sooner. She said she had indigestion last night, but she wouldn't take anything for it. Classic mom, I thought, always minimizing her own discomfort. You got her here quickly, I reassured him. That's what matters now. My father nodded, then looked around. Is Jake with you? He's at school. I came straight from work. I hesitated, then added, I can pick him up early if that would be good. The unspoken question hung between us. If he needed to say goodbye to his grandmother. My father's eyes filled with tears. Let's wait and see what the doctors say, he replied, his voice barely audible. We sat in silence after that, the minutes crawling by as we waited for news. Vanessa arrived about 30 minutes later, her face streaked with tears and her 3 children in tow. Brian, Emma, and Zoe huddled together on the waiting room chairs, looking scared and confused. Phil's in Denver for work, Vanessa explained when she saw my questioning look. I couldn't find a sitter on such short notice. I nodded in understanding, then turned to my nieces and nephew. Hey guys, I know this is scary, but the doctors are taking really good care of Grandma. Emma, the middle child at 8 years old, crept over to sit beside me. Is Grandma going to die? She whispered. I don't know, sweetheart, I answered honestly, but she's in the right place to get help. The honest answer seemed to reassure her more than false promises would have. She leaned against my side, and I put my arm around her thin shoulders. A doctor appeared in the doorway then, her scrubs rumpled and her expression serious. Family of Louise Wilson? My father stood shakily. I'm her husband, Raymond. These are our daughters. The doctor approached, her gaze taking in all of us. Your wife has experienced a significant cardiac event. We've performed an echocardiogram and found severe blockage in 2 arteries. She needs surgery right away. Heart surgery? My father repeated, his voice breaking. But she's never had heart problems before. Sometimes the first symptom of coronary artery disease is a heart attack, the doctor explained gently. The good news is we caught it relatively quickly, and she's stable enough for surgery. Dr. Keller is one of our best cardiothoracic surgeons, and he's preparing for the procedure now. Can we see her before? Vanessa asked, clutching 10-year-old Brian's hand tightly. The doctor nodded. Briefly. She's sedated, but she may be able to hear you. 2 at a time, please, and children under 12 will need to wait here. Vanessa looked panicked at the thought of leaving her children, so I stepped forward. Dad, why don't you and Vanessa go first? I'll stay with the kids. My father gave me a grateful look before following the doctor, Vanessa close behind him. Once they were gone, I gathered my nieces and nephew closer. Your mom and grandpa are going to go talk to Grandma for a minute, I explained. She's sleeping right now because the doctors gave her medicine to help her rest before surgery. Like when I had my tonsils out? Asked Zoe, the youngest at 6. Very similar, I confirmed. And then the doctors are going to fix what's making her heart sick. Brian, always the most serious of the 3, frowned. Is it because Grandma was upset about the money? Mom said you made Grandma really upset. I fought to keep my expression neutral despite the accusation. Grandma's heart problem isn't because of anything that happened in the past few days, Brian. It's something that's been developing for a long time, probably years. He didn't look entirely convinced, but nodded anyway. Emma remained pressed against my side, while Zoe climbed into my lap seeking comfort. Despite the infrequency of our visits in recent years, they still viewed me as a safe haven. Aunt Nellie, the reliable one who always had Band-Aids and stories and patience. Vanessa and my father returned about 10 minutes later, both looking shaken. Vanessa's mascara had run, leaving dark streaks down her cheeks. She's so pale, she whispered as she sank into the chair beside me. And there are all these tubes. Your turn, my father said to me. Room 412 at the end of the hall. I gently moved Zoe from my lap and stood, straightening my wrinkled blouse. I'll be right back, guys. Be good for your mom and grandpa, okay? The cardiac care unit was quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft squeak of nurses. Shoes on the linoleum floor. Room 412 had a large window that allowed staff to observe patients easily, the blinds partially drawn for privacy. My mother lay in the hospital bed, smaller than I'd ever seen her. Her silver blonde hair, usually meticulously styled, was flattened against the pillow. An oxygen tube ran beneath her nose, and IV lines snaked from both arms. The monitor beside her bed displayed her heartbeat in a jagged green line. Mom, I said softly, approaching the bed. It's Nellie. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. I took her hand carefully, mindful of the IV. The doctors are going to take good care of you, I continued, fighting to keep my voice steady. Dad and Vanessa and I are all here. The kids, too. A faint pressure against my finger suggested she'd heard me. I leaned closer. I know things have been tense between us lately, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. But none of that matters right now. What matters is you getting better. So you focus on that, okay? Focus on healing. We'll sort everything else out later. I stayed for a few more minutes, talking about ordinary things, Jake's science project, the Christmas decorations appearing around town, the unusually mild weather we'd been having. Whether she could hear me or not, it felt important to fill the silence with normalcy, with the mundane details of life that would be waiting for her after surgery. A nurse appeared in the doorway. "They're ready to take her to the OR now, Ms. Wilson." I nodded and gave my mother's hand one final squeeze. "I love you, Mom. I'll see you soon." The nurse smiled sympathetically. "The surgery will take several hours. There's a smaller waiting room on the surgical floor if you and your family want to relocate there." "Thank you," I said, taking one last look at my mother before following the nurse out. The next 6 hours were among the longest of my life. My father paced the surgical waiting room, pausing occasionally to stare out the window at the hospital grounds below. Vanessa alternated between anxious silence and frantic activity, taking the children to the cafeteria, helping them with homework they'd brought from school, and making a steady stream of phone calls to relatives and friends. I sat quietly, responding to work emails on my phone and checking in with Mark, who'd agreed to pick up Jake from school and keep him for the evening. Around 3 o'clock, I made a coffee run for everyone, needing the brief escape from the waiting room's tense atmosphere. As I stood in line at the hospital cafe, I found myself mentally calculating the cost of my mother's care. Even with Medicare and supplemental insurance, there would be significant out-of-pocket expenses. The cardiac surgery alone would likely come with a 5-figure bill, not to mention rehabilitation and medications afterward. The money I'd been planning to redirect to Jake's college fund and home repairs would now need to go toward my mother's medical bills. The realization didn't upset me as much as I might have expected. This was an emergency, not the routine financial support I'd been providing. And despite our recent conflict, I wouldn't hesitate to help my mother through this crisis. The difference I realized as I carried a tray of coffees back to the waiting room was in the intention. I was choosing to help from a place of love and concern, not obligation or guilt. The boundary I'd established still stood. I was simply making an exception for an extraordinary circumstance. When I returned to the waiting room, my father was speaking with a nurse who'd come to provide an update. The surgery was progressing well, though it was taking longer than expected due to the extent of the blockages. "Dr. Keller is placing 2 stents, the nurse explained. "Your wife's right coronary artery had significant blockage, and there was a partial obstruction in the left anterior descending artery as well." My father nodded as if he understood the medical terminology, though I could see the confusion in his eyes. "But she's going to be all right?" "Dr. Keller is very optimistic," the nurse assured him. "Your wife's overall health is good, which makes her prognosis much better. We should have another update for you in about an hour." After she left, my father accepted the coffee I offered with a distracted thank you. "I should have made her see a doctor sooner," he said, more to himself than to me. "She's been complaining about heartburn for months." "Mom hates doctors," I reminded him gently. "You know how she is. She wouldn't have gone unless you'd dragged her." He managed a weak smile. "True enough. Stubborn as the day is long, your mother." Vanessa returned with the children, who had grown increasingly restless as the day wore on. Brian was absorbed in a handheld video game, while Emma and Zoe colored in activity books provided by a sympathetic volunteer. "Any news?" Vanessa asked, accepting her coffee gratefully. "Surgery's still going," I replied. "They're placing stents in 2 arteries. The nurse said it's taking longer than expected, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. They're being thorough." Vanessa nodded, then lowered her voice. "Listen, about what Brian said earlier, about this being your fault, I want you to know I never said that to him. He must have overheard Phil and me talking." "It's okay," I said, though the accusation had stung. "Kids pick up on tensions between adults. They just don't always understand." the full context. Still, I shouldn't have been discussing our disagreement in front of the kids. She looked genuinely remorseful. It wasn't fair to you or to them. This moment of self-awareness from Vanessa was so unexpected that I wasn't sure how to respond. Before I could form a reply, my phone rang. Mark calling to check on the situation. "How's your mom doing?" he asked when I stepped into the hallway to take the call. "Still in surgery," I replied, leaning against the wall. "How's Jake?" "He's good. We're making pizza for dinner. He's worried about his grandma, though. Wanted to know if he could visit her." I closed my eyes, grateful yet again for Mark's steady co-parenting. "Tell him maybe tomorrow, depending on how she's doing after surgery. And thank you for handling this, Mark. I know it was short notice." "That's what co-parents do," he said simply. "We've got Lego Movie queued up for after dinner, so he's set for the evening. Take the time you need with your family." His kindness brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "I appreciate that. I'll text when I know more about Mom's condition." After hanging up, I took a moment to compose myself before returning to the waiting room. The emotional roller coaster of the past few days, from the Thanksgiving disaster to my financial stand with my parents to this medical emergency, had left me feeling raw and vulnerable. I'd just rejoined my family when Dr. Keller appeared, still in his surgical scrubs, a surgical cap covering his hair. My father and Vanessa both stood immediately. "The surgery was successful," the doctor announced, his tired face breaking into a smile. "We placed 2 stents to open the blocked arteries. The procedure took longer than anticipated because we discovered a third area with minor blockage that we were able to address as well." My father's shoulders sagged with relief. "So she's going to be all right?" "Barring any complications, I expect her to make a full recovery," Dr. Keller confirmed. "She'll need to make some lifestyle changes, diet, exercise, stress management, and she'll be on medication long term. But many patients return to normal activities within a few weeks of this type of procedure." "When can we see her?" Vanessa asked, her children clustering around her legs as they sensed the shift in mood. "She's in recovery now and will be closely monitored overnight in the ICU. One person can visit briefly in about an hour once she's settled. The rest of you should go home and get some rest. She'll be more alert tomorrow, and you can visit then." My father insisted on being the one to stay, which surprised no one. Vanessa gathered her children, promising to return first thing in the morning. As we walked to the parking garage together, she turned to me. "Are you coming back tomorrow too?" I nodded. "Of course. I'll bring Jake if Mom's up for visitors. He's been worried." Vanessa hesitated, then asked, "And the money situation? Have you changed your mind about that?" The question wasn't entirely unexpected, but the timing still felt inappropriate. "I haven't had time to think about that, Vanessa. Right now, I'm focused on Mom's recovery." "But you'll help with the medical bills, right?" she pressed. "Dad's already stressed about how they're going to pay for all this." I stopped walking and faced my sister directly. "Yes, I'll help with the medical bills. This is an emergency, and I'm not going to leave Mom and Dad struggling with healthcare costs. But that doesn't mean I'm going back to the previous arrangement." Vanessa looked relieved and disappointed simultaneously. "I don't understand why you're being so stubborn about this. You can afford to help them." "It's not about what I can afford," I explained for what felt like the 100th time. "It's about establishing healthy boundaries. I'll support Mom through this crisis because I love her and because medical emergencies are exactly the kind of situation where families should step up. But I'm not going back to being the family bank account for day-to-day expenses. Not unless things change significantly in how I'm treated." She rolled her eyes, the brief moment of connection we'd shared in the waiting room already fading. "Always. The martyr, aren't you, Nellie? Making sure everyone knows how much you sacrifice." "That's not fair," I said, refusing to be baited into an argument in the hospital parking garage. "I'm setting a boundary, not creating drama. There's a difference." We'd reached her minivan, the children already climbing into their seats with the automatic motions of routine. Vanessa paused before opening her door. "Just so you know," she said, her voice softer, "I am grateful for everything you've done for Mom and Dad. And for the times you've helped me out too. I don't know how to fix this." The admission was so honest that it caught me off guard. "I don't expect you to fix it, Vanessa. I just need you to respect my decisions even when you don't agree with them. And I need you to stop manipulating situations to get your way, especially when it hurts Jake." She nodded slowly. "I'll try. And I really am sorry about Thanksgiving. I didn't think it through." "I know," I said, offering a small smile. "Get those kids home. They've had a long day." As I watched her drive away, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and clarity. The crisis with my mother had put things in perspective. Some boundaries were worth maintaining, while others could flex in extraordinary circumstances. The trick was knowing the difference. I drove home in the gathering darkness, the streets already decorated with early Christmas lights. My house was quiet and empty, without Jake, but I welcomed the solitude after the emotional intensity of the hospital. After a quick shower and a simple dinner of toast and soup, I settled on the couch with my laptop to send a few work emails. An hour later, my father called with an update. My mother was stable in the ICU, drowsy but responsive. The doctors were pleased with her initial recovery. "She asked about you and Jake," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "Wanted to know if you were still angry with us." I closed my eyes, a complicated tangle of emotions rising in my throat. "I'm not angry, Dad. I was hurt by what happened on Thanksgiving. There's a difference." "I know we handled it badly," he admitted, after a pause. "Your mother and I have been talking about it, even before this happened. We shouldn't have asked you and Jake to leave. The simple acknowledgement was more healing than I'd expected." "Thank you for saying that. We've been too." "Easy on Vanessa," he continued, surprising me further. "Always making excuses for her, cleaning up her messes. It wasn't fair to put that on you, especially not on a holiday." "No, it wasn't," I agreed softly. "Jake was really confused and upset." My father sighed heavily. "I know. I owe that boy an apology. You too, Nellie." "We can talk more about this when Mom's better," I said, not wanting to push the conversation further when he was already exhausted. "Try to get some rest tonight, Dad. I'll come back to the hospital in the morning." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my living room, processing the unexpected turn our relationship had taken. My father's apology, halting though it was, represented the first real acknowledgement of the imbalance in our family dynamic. Whether it would lead to lasting change remained to be seen, but it was a start. The next morning, I picked up Jake from Mark's house early. He was subdued as he climbed into the car, his backpack clutched against his chest like a shield. "How's Grandma?" he asked immediately. "She had surgery yesterday to fix her heart," I explained as we drove toward the hospital. "The doctors say she's doing well, but she'll need to rest a lot over the next few weeks." Jake nodded solemnly. "Is she going to die?" The bluntness of children never ceased to amaze me. "No, sweetheart. The doctors were able to fix the problem with her heart. She's going to need time to heal, but she should be okay." He relaxed slightly, setting his backpack down beside him. "Good. Even though she was mean to us on Thanksgiving, I don't want Grandma to die." "People can make mistakes without being bad people," I said carefully. "Grandma and Grandpa made a poor choice on Thanksgiving, but they still love you very much." "Are you still not going to give them money?" he asked, his mind making connections in the direct way of children. I considered how to explain the nuance to a 12-year-old. "I'm going to help with Grandma's medical bills because that's what family does in an emergency. But I'm still going to be more careful about how I support them in general. Does that make sense?" Jake thought about this for a moment. "Kind of. Like how you let me make my own lunch most days, but you help me when I have a big project due?" I smiled at his analogy. "That's actually a really good comparison. I want Grandma and Grandpa to learn to handle their regular expenses themselves. But I'll help with the big unexpected things." He seemed satisfied with this explanation. As we pulled into the hospital parking lot, he asked, "Will Aunt Vanessa be there? And Brian and Emma and Zoe?" "Probably," I acknowledged. "Is that okay with you?" Jake shrugged. "I guess. But if Aunt Vanessa is mean to you, can we leave?" The protective instinct behind his question touched my heart. "Aunt Vanessa and I are working on getting along better," I assured him. "But yes, if things get uncomfortable, we can leave." The ICU was quieter than the regular hospital floors, the air heavy with the seriousness of the conditions being treated there. My mother had been moved to a private room where my father sat beside her bed, holding her hand. She looked pale, but more alert than I'd expected, her eyes brightening when she saw Jake. "There's my favorite grandson," she said, her voice weak but warm. "I'm your only grandson, Grandma," Jake replied, with the familiar correction that had become something of a running joke between them. "All the more reason you're my favorite," she smiled, extending her free hand to him. Jake approached the bed cautiously, clearly intimidated by the medical equipment surrounding her. I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," I told him quietly. "You can hold her hand. Just be gentle." He nodded and carefully took my mother's offered hand. "Dad and I made you a card," he said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. He helped me draw a heart with Band-Aids on it. My mother's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the homemade card. "That's very thoughtful, Jake. Thank you." My father stood and hugged me briefly. "She's doing well. The doctors are pleased with her progress." I studied my mother's face, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the weariness in her expression. Despite the success of the surgery, this had been a significant health crisis, one that would require substantial recovery time. "How are you feeling, Mom?" I asked, moving to the other side of the bed. "Like an elephant sat on my chest," she replied with a weak attempt at humor. "But the pain from yesterday is gone, which is an improvement." We chatted for a few minutes about the surgery and the doctor's instructions for her recovery. Jake remained close to my side, occasionally asking surprisingly insightful questions about how the stents worked and why Grandma's heart had gotten sick in the first place. A nurse appeared to check my mother's vitals, reminding us gently about the ICU's visitor limitations. 2 at a time, please, and only for 15 minutes each hour. "We should go and let Mom rest," I suggested, noticing her eyelids growing heavy. "Dad, have you eaten today? Jake and I could bring you something from the cafeteria." My father looked like he was about to decline, but then nodded. "That would be nice. Thank you, Nellie." As Jake and I headed toward the cafeteria, we encountered Vanessa and her children in the hallway. Brian and Emma were arguing about something, while Zoe trailed behind, clutching a stuffed animal. "How is she?" Vanessa asked, her face drawn with worry. "Tired but stable," I replied. "The nurse just came in to check on her, so you might want to wait a few minutes before going in. Dad's with her now." Vanessa nodded, then turned to her bickering children. "You 3 need to be quiet in the ICU. No arguing, no running, no loud voices. Understand?" They nodded dutifully, though Brian continued to glare at his sister. "We're heading to the cafeteria to get Dad some lunch," I said. "Do you want us to bring anything back for you or the kids?" Vanessa looked momentarily surprised by the offer. "That would be great, actually. Phil dropped us off on his way to work, so we don't have a car." I smiled at my nieces and nephew. "Want to come with us, guys? You can help pick out something. For your mom." The children were eager for the change of scenery, and Jake seemed pleased to spend time with his cousins despite the tense circumstances. As we walked to the cafeteria, Zoe slipped her small hand into mine trustingly. "Is Grandma going to have a big scar?" she asked, her voice serious. "Not too big," I assured her. "The doctors use special tools that only need small openings." This seemed to satisfy her, and she skipped ahead to catch up with Jake and Emma. Brian hung back, walking beside me with the self-conscious air of a boy trying to act more grown-up than his 10 years. "Mom said you're paying for Grandma's hospital bills," he stated matter-of-factly. I glanced at him, surprised by his directness. "I'm helping with some of the medical costs, yes. But you're not giving them money for other stuff anymore," he continued, "because of what happened at Thanksgiving." I chose my words carefully, aware that Brian was likely reporting back to Vanessa. "I'm reconsidering how I support Grandma and Grandpa financially. That doesn't mean I don't care about them or won't help in emergencies." Brian frowned, processing. "This. Mom says you have lots of money because you have a big job and no husband to spend it on." The comment stung, but I kept my expression neutral. "Everyone's financial situation is different, Brian. Part of being an adult is making careful decisions about how to use your resources, money, time, energy. Right now, my priority is taking care of Jake and saving for his future." "But family. It's supposed to help family," he persisted. "That's what Mom always says." "She's right," I agreed. "Family should help each other. But help comes in many forms, not just money. And healthy relationships include respect and boundaries." Brian didn't look entirely convinced, but we'd reached the cafeteria by then, and the conversation was cut short by the children's excitement over the dessert options. I made a mental note to speak with Vanessa about discussing adult financial matters in front of her children. The next few days fell into a pattern. My mother was moved from the ICU to a regular room, her recovery proceeding without complications. I balanced hospital visits with work and caring for Jake, while my father remained almost constantly at my mother's bedside. Vanessa came daily, with her children, Phil joining them when his work schedule allowed. The tensions between Vanessa and me eased somewhat in the face of our shared concern for our mother. We didn't discuss money or Thanksgiving again, focusing instead on practical matters, organizing a cleaning service for our parents' house, coordinating meal deliveries for when my mother returned home, researching cardiac rehabilitation programs. By the fifth day, the doctors were discussing discharge plans. My mother would need significant support during her initial recovery at home, including help with meals, transportation to follow-up appointments, and monitoring of her medications. "I can take some time off work," my father said during a family meeting in my mother's hospital room. "But I'm not sure how we'll manage all the appointments. The cardiologist wants to see her twice a week at first, and then there's the cardiac rehab sessions." "I can help with rides," Vanessa offered. "At least on Mondays and Wednesdays when the kids are in school all day." "And I can handle Fridays," I added. "I can work remotely those days and take Mom to appointments as needed." My father looked relieved at our coordination. "That still leaves Tuesdays and Thursdays, plus all the other errands and household tasks." "What about hiring a part-time home health aide?" I suggested. "Just for the first few weeks, until Mom's more mobile. Insurance might cover part of it, and I can help with the rest." My mother, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "I don't need a stranger coming into my house to take care of me. I'll be fine with just your father's help." "Mom, you've just had major heart surgery," Vanessa pointed out gently. "Dad can't do everything, and he's not getting any younger himself." Our father looked somewhat affronted by this characterization, but didn't argue the point. At 71, he was still active, but had his own health concerns, including arthritis that sometimes limited his mobility. "What about Mrs. Brennan next door?" I suggested, remembering our parents' longtime neighbor. "She's retired, and she's mentioned wanting some part-time work. She already knows you both well." This compromise seemed more acceptable to my mother. "I suppose that might work, as long as it's temporary." "Just until you're back on your feet," I assured her, "and it would give Dad a break to run errands or just rest." The matter settled, we moved on to discussing medication management and dietary changes. The cardiologist had prescribed a low-sodium, heart-healthy diet that would require significant adjustments to my parents' eating habits. "I'll put together some easy recipes," I offered. "And maybe we could set up a meal delivery service for the first month, just to make things easier." "That sounds expensive," my father commented, his expression concerned. I met his gaze steadily. Consider it part of my contribution to Mom's recovery. It's a one-time expense, not an ongoing commitment. He nodded, understanding the distinction I was making. We hadn't discussed the monthly payments since my mother's hospitalization, but it was clear that my decision to stop them remained in effect. As the family meeting concluded, Vanessa pulled me aside in the hallway. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began hesitantly. "About boundaries and respect." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by her introspection. And you might have a point, she admitted, looking uncomfortable. "Phil and I had a long talk last night. He thinks I've been taking advantage of you for years." The frank acknowledgement took me aback. "What brought this on?" Vanessa sighed, leaning against the wall. "Seeing you step up for Mom's medical bills without hesitation, even after everything that happened. It made me realize there's a difference between genuine family support and, well, the kind of thing I've been asking for." "The food truck," I supplied. "Among other things," she conceded. "Phil pointed out that I've never really stuck with any of my business ideas long enough to make them successful. He thinks I need to prove I'm serious before asking for more investments." This was surprisingly mature insight from my sister. "He's not wrong," I said carefully. "I know," Vanessa replied, running a hand through her hair. "Anyway, I wanted to thank you for helping with Mom, despite our disagreements, and to tell you that Phil and I are going to cover part of Dad's expenses while Mom's recovering. It's not much, but it's something." The gesture, small as it was, represented a significant shift in our family dynamic. "That will mean a lot to them, Vanessa, and to me." She offered a tentative smile. "Don't get too excited. I'm still a disaster in many ways, but I'm trying to be more aware of how I affect other people. That's all any of us can do," I said, returning her smile. "Keep trying to be better." The next day, I returned to the hospital to find my mother sitting up in a chair beside her bed, looking more like herself than she had since the surgery. My father had gone home to shower and rest, leaving us alone for the first time since her hospitalization. "You're looking better," I commented as I took the seat beside her. "The doctors say I can go home tomorrow if my blood work looks good," she replied, adjusting the blanket across her lap. "I can't wait to sleep in my own bed." I smiled, relieved by her progress. "That's great news, Mom. We've got everything ready. At the house. Mrs. Brennan is coming by this afternoon to get instructions about your medication schedule." My mother nodded, then fixed me with a searching look. "Your father told me about the conversation you two had. About Thanksgiving." I tensed slightly, unsure where this was going. "We didn't talk about it in detail, just acknowledged that it was handled poorly." "It was more than handled poorly," she said quietly. "It was wrong, what we did to you and Jake. I've had a lot of time to think, lying here with all these tubes and monitors, time to consider what's really important." The sincerity in her voice made my throat tighten. "Mom, you don't need to—" "I do need to," she interrupted gently. "I need to apologize, Nellie. We should never have asked you to leave. Vanessa was being unreasonable, and instead of confronting her behavior, we catered to it. We've been doing that her whole life, and it hasn't served any of us well." The acknowledgement I'd been seeking for years brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you for saying that." My mother reached for my hand, her grip weaker than usual, but determined. "Your father also told me about the monthly payments, that you'd stopped them before my heart attack." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "I want you to know that I understand," she continued. "You've been carrying too much of the family's financial burden. That was never our intention when you first offered to help after your father's retirement." "It started with good intentions," I acknowledged, "but it became an expectation rather than a gift. And when I felt disrespected on Thanksgiving, continuing the payments felt wrong." My mother sighed, looking older than her 69 years. "We took you for granted, Nellie. Your reliability, your generosity, your forgiveness when we disappointed. We won't make that mistake again." The promise in her words warmed something that had been cold inside me since Thanksgiving. "I'm not asking you and Dad to be perfect, Mom. I just need to be treated with the same consideration you give to Vanessa." "You deserve that and more," she said, squeezing my hand weakly. "And Jake deserves grandparents who put his feelings first, not last." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the weight of years of unspoken grievances finally beginning to lift between us. "Speaking of Jake," my mother said eventually, "I'd like to do something special for him when I'm feeling better, to make up for Thanksgiving. Do you think he'd like to help me plant a garden in the spring? He always enjoyed that when he was younger." The simple, heartfelt gesture brought a smile to my face. "He'd love that, Mom. He was just saying last week that he wishes we had space for a vegetable garden at our place." "It's settled then," she declared with a nod. "Come spring, Jake and I will plant the biggest vegetable garden the neighborhood has ever seen, and you'll all enjoy the harvest." Her enthusiasm reminded me of the mother I'd known in childhood, creative, determined, full of plans. Before the family dynamics had grown complicated, before Vanessa's needs had somehow always taken precedence over mine. When my father returned an hour later, he found us looking through gardening magazines the hospital volunteer had brought, making plans for spring plantings and discussing the merits of various tomato varieties. The normalcy of the moment, the absence of tension, felt like a gift. The following week brought my mother home from the hospital and our family into a new pattern of shared responsibility. Vanessa drove our mother to Monday appointments. Phil helped my father with household repairs on weekends, and I handled Friday medical visits and coordinated the meal delivery service. Mrs. Brennan came daily to assist with basic care tasks and provide company when my father needed breaks. The arrangement wasn't perfect. Vanessa occasionally forgot appointments, requiring last-minute schedule adjustments, and my father sometimes resisted accepting help, but it represented a more balanced distribution of family obligations than we'd had in years. 2 weeks after my mother's discharge, as I was driving her home from a cardiac rehabilitation session, she broached the subject that had remained largely unaddressed. "Your father and I have been talking about finances," she said, gazing out the passenger window at the winter landscape. "We've decided to sell the boat." The announcement surprised me. The small cabin cruiser had been my father's pride and joy since his retirement, though they rarely used it anymore due to the maintenance costs. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Dad loves that boat." "He loves it, but we don't need it," she replied practically. "The sale will cover our property taxes for the next 2 years and leave enough to create an emergency fund. Phil knows someone at his marina who's interested." I processed this information as we waited at a red light. "I think that's a wise decision." "Mom, the boat was costing more in upkeep than you were getting in enjoyment from it." She nodded. "We're making other changes too. Downgrading the cable package, switching to a cheaper cell phone plan, using the senior discounts we've been too proud to ask for until now." She turned to look at me directly. "We should have done this years ago instead of relying on you to supplement our income." "I was happy to help when I could," I said honestly. "But you're right that these adjustments make sense for your current situation. Vanessa and Phil are contributing $200 a month toward our expenses," she added, sounding pleased. "It's not much, but it's what they can manage right now. Phil says they can increase it once they pay off their car loan next year." The change in my sister's approach to family support was perhaps the most surprising development of all. "That's great, Mom. I'm glad they're able to help. And we want you to know," my mother continued, her voice growing more serious, "that we don't expect you to resume the monthly payments. Your father and I will manage with our adjusted budget and the help Vanessa is providing. You've done more than your share over the years." Her words lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. "Thank you for understanding. I'd still like to help with your medical expenses, though. The insurance won't cover everything, and those bills shouldn't all fall on you and Dad." "We'd appreciate that," she acknowledged, but as a specific, time-limited expense, not an open-ended obligation. We arrived at my parents' house, where Mrs. Brennan was waiting to help my mother with her afternoon medications and rest period. As I helped her from the car, she paused and turned to me. "Nellie, I've been thinking about Christmas. I know we haven't discussed holiday plans yet, but your father and I would love to host dinner at our place. If you and Jake are comfortable with that," she added quickly. "Vanessa and her family will be there, but I've already made it clear to her that there will be no drama this year." The invitation represented another step in healing our family relationship. "I'd like that, Mom, and I know Jake would too. He's been asking about seeing his cousins again." "Wonderful," she smiled, some of her old energy returning to her face. "And there's one more thing. Your father and I would like to have Jake stay with us for a few days during his winter break. We thought we might take him to that science museum he's been wanting to visit." The gesture touched me deeply. It was exactly the kind of grandparent involvement Jake had been missing, focused time that was about him, not about adult dynamics or Vanessa's children. "He'd love that," I said, blinking back unexpected tears. And so would I. The 3 weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of work deadlines, Jake's school events, and continued support for my mother's recovery. Vanessa and I maintained our fragile new understanding, focusing on practical cooperation rather than addressing past grievances directly. It wasn't perfect healing, but it was progress. On Christmas Eve, Jake and I arrived at my parents' house, carrying gifts and a sweet potato casserole I'd prepared. The front door was decorated with a wreath Jake and my mother had made together during one of his weekend visits, and through the window I could see the tree glittering with ornaments. My father opened the door, looking more relaxed than he had in months. "Merry Christmas, you two. Come in out of the cold." The house smelled of pine and cinnamon, the familiar scents of childhood Christmas celebrations. In the living room, my mother was directing Vanessa and Phil in arranging presents under the tree while their children played a board game on the floor. "Aunt Nellie!" Zoe exclaimed, abandoning the game to run toward me. "Did you bring cookies? Mom said you always bring the best cookies." I laughed, handing her the tin I'd packed. "Sugar cookies with extra sprinkles, just how you like them." Jake immediately joined his cousins, their previous awkwardness forgotten in the excitement of Christmas Eve. I watched him integrate seamlessly into the group, relieved that the adult conflicts hadn't permanently damaged the children's relationships with each other. "Everything looks beautiful, Mom," I commented, noting the festive decorations throughout the house. "You've been busy." "Mrs. Brennan helped," she admitted with a smile. "And your father did all the high-reaching. Doctor's orders. No ladders for me until February." Dinner was a relaxed affair, conversation flowing more naturally than it had at family gatherings in recent memory. Vanessa shared news about a part-time bookkeeping position she'd accepted at Phil's Marina, her first steady job in years. My parents discussed their plans to visit friends in Arizona in March, a trip they'd postponed several times due to financial constraints, but now felt they could manage with their adjusted budget. "And what about you, Nellie?" my father asked as we lingered over dessert. "Any big plans for the new year?" I considered the question, realizing I hadn't allowed myself much forward thinking lately. "Actually, yes. Jake and I are going to visit Aunt Rachel in Colorado over spring break. She's offering to teach him to ski." "That sounds wonderful," my mother said warmly. "Rachel has always been such a good friend to you, almost like family." The acknowledgement of Rachel's importance in my life was another small but significant sign of change. In the past, my mother had sometimes seemed threatened by my close relationship with my college roommate. "And I'm thinking of redoing the kitchen this summer," I added. "The appliances are all original to the house and they're starting to fail one by one." "A kitchen renovation!" Vanessa exclaimed with genuine interest. "That's exciting! What style are you going for?" The conversation turned to cabinet colors and countertop materials, my sister offering surprisingly practical suggestions based on her friend's recent renovations. The simple, normal exchange, sisters discussing home improvements without underlying tension, felt like a Christmas gift in itself. Later, as the children played with new toys and the adults relaxed with coffee and Christmas cookies, my father asked Jake about his recent science project. It was about sustainable energy, Jake explained enthusiastically. I built a model house with solar panels and a wind turbine. Ms. Garcia said it was the best in the class. That's impressive, my father said, his pride evident. You know, I used to work with solar energy systems back in the 70s during the energy crisis. The technology has come a long way since then. Really? Jake's eyes widened with interest. Could you help me build a real solar panel someday? Like one that could power my electronic stuff? I don't see why not, my father replied, clearly pleased by the request. Maybe we could make that our project for next summer, after we finish. Grandma's vegetable garden, of course. The casual planning for future activities, the assumption that our family relationships would continue to heal and strengthen, warmed me as much as the fire crackling in the hearth. The past month had brought painful confrontations and a medical crisis, but it had also created space for a healthier family dynamic to emerge. As I watched Jake lean against my father's knee, listening intently to an explanation of photovoltaic cells, I felt a profound gratitude for the difficult boundaries I'd established after Thanksgiving. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for our families is to stop enabling patterns that harm us all. My mother caught my eye from across the room and smiled, a knowing look passing between us. We both understood that the work of reshaping our family relationships was far from complete. Old habits would resurface, new challenges would arise. But we'd taken the crucial first steps toward something better, not just for me and Jake, but for all of us. Later that night, as Jake slept, in his old bedroom at my parents' house and the adults gathered in the kitchen for one last cup of Christmas cheer, Vanessa pulled me aside. I have something for you, she said, pressing a small envelope into my hand. It's not much, but I wanted you to have it tonight, just between us. Curious, I opened the envelope to find a check for $1,500, a fraction of what I'd spent on her various ventures over the years, but significant nonetheless. It's the first payment, she explained quietly, for all the loans I never repaid. Phil and I worked out a schedule to pay you back over the next 2 years. The gesture left me momentarily speechless. Of all the changes in our family dynamic, this was perhaps the most unexpected. Vanessa, you don't have to. I do have to, she interrupted firmly. Not because you need the money, but because I need to make this right. You were always there for me, Nellie, even when I didn't deserve it. I took advantage of that, and I'm sorry. The simple apology, delivered without drama or excuses, was worth more than the check in my hand. Thank you, I said, embracing her briefly. This means a lot. She returned the hug, then pulled back with a smile. Don't get used to me being all mature and responsible. I'm sure I'll do something impulsive and ridiculous by Valentine's Day. I laughed, recognizing the self-deprecating humor as her way of breaking the emotional tension. Probably, but maybe just a little less impulsive than before. Baby steps, she agreed with a wink. As we rejoined our parents and Phil in the kitchen, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The journey from Thanksgiving's discord to Christmas's harmony hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been painful confrontations, difficult truths, and a medical crisis that had put everything into perspective. But standing in my childhood kitchen, surrounded by the complicated, imperfect people who made up my family, I knew we were moving in the right direction. The boundaries I'd established had created space for something healthier to grow, not just for me and Jake, but for all of us. The journey wasn't over. Real change never happens overnight or without setbacks. But as I looked around at my family, my father pouring coffee, my mother arranging cookies on a plate, Vanessa and Phil leaning comfortably against each other, I felt hopeful about the path ahead. Sometimes the most dependable thing you can do for the people you love is to show them where the lines must be drawn. And sometimes, in the drawing of those lines, you find a clearer picture of what family can and should be.